All I gotta say is, damn. Because, holy moly, this freaking economy is wild. So, what happened yesterday? Nvidia reported their earnings after hours. So, what we saw was this big excitement on Wednesday in anticipation of earnings, and then when the earnings actually reported, this is all in Eastern time, so you can see right here at 5 p.m. we get really, really excited. And what happens is overnight, it seems like Nvidia is doing great. It opened today at 195, somewhere around there. And the rest of the day, just a steady rug pull on average consumers. Incredible. You can see the SP 500 did the exact same thing. It just has this wild run up all the way overnight. So wow, boom. And then 675 at 10 a.m. Boom. I made a lot of money here. I kept betting against the market. I got pretty lucky because I actually anticipated that there might be a rug pull. If you look at the way things are headed, even though Nvidia earnings call was coming up, it seemed evident that the AI bubble is starting to burst. The music is starting to slow down. And so I see this as one last hurrah for people to get exit liquidity. It's for people to just be able to take their money and run. You often see this when there's a lot of volatility and markets are about to implode. They'll shoot up really quickly and then they'll crash ever more so. Actually, gold is a great example of this. So right here, there's a massive shoot up from 220 all the way up to 270 within 2-day period. This is 3x leverage. That's why it's so massive. But then right after that, you can see there's a huge drop down just the next day from 270 to 212. So that's how you know everything is looking really frothy, when you have stuff like that going on. And then again, a huge drop. I lost a lot of money here, but then I got out before it really bottomed out. Now, if I had held, I'd probably have been able to get out at a better spot like here. But look at where it is today. It's at 152. Realistically, it's better to get out sooner than later because you don't know how fast it'll drop. This could have happened again. So this down to 160, who knows? Maybe it could have just gone straight down to 120 and then stayed there. What's going to happen next? Well, if the Fed holds interest rates, let me go to economy, and go to December. If we look at the interest rate change, it seems very likely that there's no change now in December. Powell even admitted, he said that stocks seemed fairly highly valued. I think a couple months ago he said that. So when we look at this, we have a Fed decision probably not to cut rates. And then we look at the unemployment report. So unemployment claims came out this morning. I don't know if these are actually the backdated ones. Yeah, they're delayed by 26 days because of the US government shutdown. So this is not looking so great. Even though the unemployment claims are going down a little bit, it's still relatively high. And then what's also of note is, I think this is the November unemployment rate. So it has gone down a tiny bit, but the unemployment claims have gone down a little bit, but it could be people who are just falling off of unemployment because they've been unemployed for too long. If you're unemployed for more than 6 months, I think you stop getting the unemployment checks. the layoff checks or something. You might want to look more into that yourself. I'm only speaking from some of my own personal experience. I think you get 6 months of unemployment pay, and then you're on your own from there on. So unemployment rate here is at 4.4%. That's the actual, whereas the forecast was 4.3%. That's not good. The economy is not looking hot. And that, I think, is why, even though NVIDIA had earnings that exceeded their projection, you see this. If you listened to the NVIDIA earnings call, it was a lot of vision. And there's nothing wrong with vision. I genuinely think that everything they say is right. That as a machine learning engineer, I think that everything they say makes sense. They're going to put AI and put machine learning into more and more products. And it's not necessarily that all of the places are suitable for AI right now, but it makes sense that these things would become more and more complex as people's demands and expectations for how the world around them operates also increases. It's kind of like how Apple made this big push into user experience. And even though Microsoft was innovating a lot, they had a lot of interesting features before Apple, even though sometimes people would argue they're cheaper, the hardware is better on PCs and stuff like that. Macintosh, Apple, as a brand, won out a lot of consumers because they cared about the user experience. They made things so easy to use, so seamless, that it was an incredible value add to a lot of people's lives. I think that that could also be the case with how we see AI moving towards. AI has been kind of like a new technology that people are playing around with, and they're trying to get used to and trying to understand where it's actually going to be helpful. But just like websites, they could probably operate if you just set up HTML and you didn't have any pictures or colors. You can make everything black and white and not be responsive and bouncy and fun. But the user experience matters. That's why front-end engineers were paid a lot to improve the experience of websites, to make them have cool carousels and to have floating things, have things that are colorful, because it matters. And it's that same thesis that makes me long-term bullish on NVIDIA, which is not to say I think I'd put money on NVIDIA today. In fact, I actually was betting against NVIDIA just today because it went up so fast. I said, there's no way that this can sustain itself. This kind of movement up is only, usually followed by a big crash, from my experience of watching things move up and down on the markets for years. So long term, I think NVIDIA is going to continue to be the most valuable company in the world. I think that what they have to offer is really great, but not at these prices right now, because everything is overvalued. There's an everything bubble that people talk about. So what we see here is a correction of those things. Now we're back at Friday, October 10th levels. Is it going to keep going further? Are we now in bear market territory? Maybe. And what would be the signs of a turnaround? What would be the catalysts for making us bullish? Well, it looks like the Fed might start doing some things, like if they do actually cut the interest rates in December, if they start quantitative easing. You can look that up. Quantitative easing. It's basically where the banks start purchasing long-term securities from other institutions so that there's more physical dollars in the money supply. So in other words, let's say there's not enough paper US dollars. Just as an example, let's just pretend it's physical paper US dollars. And people want the paper US dollars. Well, the US government would basically say, hey, I've got paper US dollars. I'll give it to you for, let's say, some of these mortgage-backed bonds. And you go ahead and give other people those dollars that you need to use. This actually ties into the overnight repo markets that people have been whispering about, because the Fed has stepped in a couple more times in order to provide more liquidity for overnight dollars, because people have been wanting to get more US dollars, but then during the overnight periods, the interest rate that people were charging actually went, I think it went past the Fed interest rate, which is bad because it means that the Fed is no longer controlling the interest rate there. So that could potentially be an issue. Although I've been talking with some people, and some people say that that's literally just the Fed's job, is to try and make sure that they provide liquidity and stuff like that. So it's actually more of a nothing burger. I have no idea, and this is something that I would love some feedback from. I'm actually going to try and investigate more on my own, but whether or not the Fed injecting money into these overnight markets is a good or a bad thing remains to be seen. In the long-term macroeconomic scale, I do think that what matters the most will be how the unemployment rates are doing, how the interest rates and inflation are doing, and how people generally feel about AI. Those are probably, and then geopolitics too. If there's, any kind of trade war issues with China, or if there's some deterioration against Russia with the West and stuff. So I'd say those are probably the big 5 things to pay attention to. Everything else is just kind of noise. I'm not saying that other stuff isn't important, but I think those are going to be the things that move markets the most. And that's what I'll try to keep reporting on. That's what we'll try to keep following. I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I want to keep this one shorter. Hopefully you don't mind me espousing some of my own personal investment theses, but this is not investment advice. This is just a guy on a soapbox talking through some ideas out loud with people. Feel free to leave your feedback, leave some comments, help teach me something. Thanks so much for following. Hope to catch you in the next one.